to our daily Bible study. I am your host, Dr. Derek A. Reeves, and we're going to continue on in the 15th series that's entitled The Process of Being Spiritual. Today's lesson is Why the Need to Be Spiritual. I want to come from Galatians 5 and 16 today. Paul writes on this wise, "This I say, then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh." As we spoke on yesterday, when you deal with the term spirit or those things that are related to spirit, they can be several parts of speech. Number one, spirit can be a noun. It deals with a thing. It deals with that portion of man that is the reserves by which God can communicate in him and with him and through him, and also bring about a drastic change in his nature. Number two, the term spiritual can be an adjective that describes a state of being, a functionality, how something looks. It is a description of a behavioral pattern. And then number three, when we talk about spiritually, it's an adverb, that modifies a noun. How does one behave spiritually? How does one think spiritually? So it describes the content of the quality of an action. And so you have a noun, you have an adjective, and you have an adverb. But then when we talk about spirituality goes back to being a noun, because it talks about the state of an individual, the state of an individual's life, maybe the state of an individual's actions, behavior, and condition inwardly as one has given themselves over to the exertions of the divine nature of the Spirit of God. So why then is there a need to be spiritual? First of all, Jesus said at one time, he says, "You worship you know not what, but we do know what we worship. For the true worshipers of God worship, and they must worship in spirit and in truth." And so the context then deals with relationship. If I am to have a relationship with God, then I must meet him in the venue that allows me to fellowship with him in accordance to his nature. True fellowship is much more than having a pet or being an associate. True fellowship is more than just having someone by your side, but it is an interactive communication and an interactive relationship that now brings individuals into a state where they are sharing, they are interacting, they are communicating, and they are developing a vibrant relationship where they now can come together in an extended relationship that becomes more intimate as friends, as those who truly love one another. And so because God is spirit, then the only way I can truly fellowship with him is to fellowship with him in spirit. And that means being spiritual. Yes, I can talk with him, and he can talk to whosoever he pleases. But to fellowship in an intimate relationship, I have to do it within the boundaries of where God exists, in the boundaries of his nature. And so, spirituality, spiritual. He says, Paul, "This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh." He moves on to explain to us that not only do we have a spiritual part, and not only are we spiritual because we have a spiritual part, but we are also natural. When God created man, he breathed into him the breath of life, but he formed man from the dust of the earth. And so man is both natural and man is spiritual. The natural part of man is called the sarx. It is his humanity or his humanness. When he was first created, everything was human, body, soul, and spirit. But after the fall of Adam, through his disobedience, then man became sarkikos, naturally driven. Even though he had a natural nature and he was spiritual from the beginning, when he fell, he became naturally driven, naturally consumed to experience the natural things of life, which were centered in the physiology. And so Paul says, if I do not walk in the Spirit or incline myself to become spiritual, which means to be led by the Spirit of God, to be led by the inner emotions or the inner emanations that cause me to, again, function within the same atmosphere, the same boundaries of spiritual behavior as God, then I cease to fellowship with him. I cease to have relationship with him, because if I don't walk in the Spirit, then I start becoming and acting more fleshly or carnal. This means then I start to fulfill or I behave within the perimeters of my naturalness, of my humanness. And the scripture tells us in the book of Galatians all of those things that are the inclinations, the propensities, and the proclivities of the flesh. He says the works of the flesh. And so when we start talking about the works of the flesh then speak of the natural inclination on how humanity will respond to life itself, to others, and to God. And so the natural or the carnal mind, the sarx mind, the humanness that is devoid of spiritual attitude or spiritual inspiration, is of a certainty. The scripture says it is an offense against God. It wars against God. It fights against God. And it's not subject. It will not submit to God on its own. It has to be drawn into a relationship where there is a reason, there is a discovery, and there is a desire to interact with God. And so without a spiritual nature, we are predisposed to being carnal. Without a spiritual nature, we are predisposed to being more naturally inclined. We will look at things from human perspectives. We will navigate our lives through human perspectives. We will behave as if the only thing that matters is our physiology, survival in this life, getting ahead, and achieving those goals and those objectives that are specifically in tune with our plan instead of God's plan. And so when he says to walk in the Spirit, and I want to look at this, he's talking about a Greek term, peripatio. And peripatio is not just simply being in motion or walking, but it also deals with roaming or roving. In other words, how you live your life, how you maintain a certain walk of life and conduct. And so it talks about navigating the deportment in which an individual adopts. And so he says, then if we navigate our life in the Spirit, in the context of the born-again nature, then we will not fulfill the illegal desires of our humanness that now becomes self-centered, self-sacrificing, self-exalting, self-deifying. And so the need to be spiritual brings us into the context where it is the only way we can relate and have experience and relationship with our God. I thank you for joining us today. We are all out of time. This has been our daily Bible study, and I am your host, Dr. Derek A. Reeves. God bless you.